Nice.
Are we also recording?
Yes. Great. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 7th day of the EU-India People Summit. You're with me, Dr. Rajamony, and I'm joined today with Ambassador Venu Rajamony, who is here with us for a fireside conversation. And to introduce you all to Ambassador Venu Rajamony, Ambassador is a career diplomat with 34 years of experience, scholar of international relations, and former journalist. Ambassador Rajamony is well-known public speaker, author, and patron of arts and culture. Ambassador Rajamony was Ambassador of India to Netherlands from 2017 to 2020. He was also a permanent representative of India to the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, and responsible for India's relation with the International Court of Justice and Permanent Court of Arbitration. Ambassador Rajamony's tenure in Netherlands saw a vibrancy in bilateral relations like never before, and during the time he also authored 2 books. And I want to also add this, that prior to being in Netherlands, you were a press secretary to Indian President Pranab Mukherjee, and you were also responsible for formulating India's policies toward the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, African Development Bank, and International Fund for Agricultural Development. So welcome, Ambassador Rajamony. There's so much to talk about you and so little time and a little hammering going in my background. So with this, I would start my first question to you, that where do you see the bilateral relations between EU and India progressing? What is your overall impression of it? Because you were also in the service recently, and which direction are we heading? And I ask you this in light of the recent situation between China and European Union, where European Union is pulling back from China and going more towards India. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone in Europe. Thank you, Ridhambra, for that sweet introduction and for the first question. Let me begin by saying how happy I am to join all of you in this forum. I would like to congratulate all of you on having conceived this India-Europe People Summit. I wish you the very best for its success, and I hope you can continue to maintain this process, this momentum in the coming days and years. Coming to your first question, let me say that I am very optimistic about relations between India and Europe. India as a country and Europe as a combination of countries, as an international entity, are both people who share a lot of common values. We believe in democracy, we believe in freedoms, we believe in the rule of law, we believe in pluralism and freedom of religion. We believe in freedom of speech and expression more than anything else. So what unites us is not just self-interest in the pure or in a conventional diplomatic sense, but also a collective vision about how our societies should be governed internally, and what we think is our vision for the world. We both would like to see a world where these values, these principles flourish. So that is the first point which I would say when we talk about India and the European Union. But going on from that, we live in a world which is a very troubled world at this point of time, whether it is COVID crisis, whether it's conflict in different parts of the world, whether it is racial discrimination, violations of human rights, persecutions of minorities. There are a lot of things which are wrong, which are happening in the world. And in such a world, both India and the European Union are strong believers in collective action, in working through the United Nations with the cooperation of all countries, and in addressing, in the world coming together to address the problems of the world. So that view of collective international endeavor is the second important thing which unites India and the European Union. And the third, of course, is very good, very close political relations as well as economic relations. The latter, of course, directly benefiting the business and the industry in both countries, and through them, the people of the two countries. And the political relations, of course, creating an environment in which India and the European Union continue to raise the relationship from one level to the other. And also, India continues to maintain strong bilateral relations with individual members of the European Union. So seeing all of this put together puts India-European Union relations on a sound footing. The emerging world, I believe, is a multipolar world. In this multipolar world, the European Union and India will both be two important and strong poles, while the relations between China and the European Union may go up and down, may vary from time to time. And right now, there might be a process of distancing, a process of wariness and caution of each other. I think India-European Union relations is not based on EU's relationship with China. It stands on its own, and irrespective of what is the status or the nature of EU's relations with China, India-EU relations will continue to strengthen and grow from time to time, from now into the future. The Chinese relationship, China is a country which is important for India, which is important for European Union. It's a country with which India has differences, European Union has differences. Each of us are in our own way trying to address these differences, even as we continue to strengthen our relations with China. So there is no need for a third country or a third factor to come in to bring India and the EU together. We have enough strength and momentum of our own. We have enough reasons of our own. We have enough common interests of our own that will automatically lead to a strengthening of the relationship. And in this relationship, I think members of the diaspora, like all of you who are part of this forum, who are part of this platform, who are joining in today, also play a very important and critical role.
Hans, I see Anu has raised his hand and there's hammering at my end, so I will let Anu take that question while I handle the hammering.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your opening lines. This kind of sets the mood and tone of the conversation we're going to have. In the past few days, we also had interactions with some other ambassadors, but a distinction I can make with you is that I was going through the kind of books that you have written, and I will just read out the titles. India and the UAE in celebration of a legendary friendship. India and the Netherlands, past, present, and future. What we can learn from the Dutch rebuilding Kerala post-2018 floods. Select paintings of Rashtrapati Bhavan, company paintings in Rashtrapati Bhavan, paintings in the Ashoka Hall of Rashtrapati Bhavan. So when I look at these list of books that you have written, although we know that you are into foreign services, you are an ambassador, but it also gives an impression that you were a very curious, you had a curious presence when you were in Europe and other countries. And you are someone who also takes interest in arts, What I'm trying to point out is that this brings to the thoughts of Tagore and Nehru, where they wish for Indians to be open-minded and open to the world, curious, And I see you are making parallels through your experiences, especially for Kerala and the Dutch expertise in water management. Even in Europe, the Dutch are seen as experts. So what kind of suggestions, inspiration you could give us, the Indian diaspora, to be curious, to be present? Thank you.
Well, I would encourage all of you, especially since most of you are young, to be as curious as possible, to be messengers of India, to be ambassadors of India in the broadest sense possible in Europe, to try and bring the best of India to these countries, as well as to bring the best of Europe back to India. As a career diplomat, as an ambassador, that is what I have tried to do, and the books have been an extension of my work. But you don't really have to be a diplomat to do that. You just have to be someone who's interested in where you live in, who looks at the society around you, who studies the history of the countries or the social circumstances or the economic strengths, the political peculiarities of the countries, the societies in which you live, and then who tries to draw parallels and connections to what occurs in India. India being a huge subcontinent itself, you can do it vis-a-vis a particular sub-region within India, or you can do it vis-a-vis the whole of India. So there is enormous potential to do academic work on these lines. But going beyond academic work, I think you can also truly be promoters of friendship between the people of our two countries, whoever your friends are, irrespective of where they come from, what nationality. Encourage them to visit India, to travel to India, talk to them about India, tell them the stories of our mythology, tell them about the forests, the mountains, the desert, the beaches, the wide variety of India, the diversity in languages that we enjoy, the different ethnic cultures, the ethnic cuisines that we have in this country. So do talk to them about India, encourage them to visit India, to travel to India, to do business with India, to study India, to come to India and study, or to come to India and teach, and equally talk to others about India, to try and take what is the best of India, the essence of India as you understand it, to them, so that they can truly become participants in our nation building exercise, in our collective endeavor to bring the best of freedoms and the best of prosperity and the best of development to our 1.3 billion people.
Yeah, if I may just add one more line. You talked about how important role we can play for bringing in information or people back to India. How would you also see the Indian diaspora mingling and integrating with the local culture and people? Because usually it's a very natural reflex that people try to stay in groups, Chinese, Indians, and that's what happens also in the United States. In England, we see the ghettos, How would you also tell us in the other direction how we should push ourselves?
Well, I think that is a natural tendency which you cannot fight against. But still, I would say that Indians are amongst the most adaptable people possible. Any one of us who has lived in India, if you are born in Kerala and you go and live in Delhi, or you live in Assam, or you live in Mumbai or Kashmir, you already have some amount of experience in dealing with the different culture, different language, different set of people, or people with habits and characteristics very different from your own, people who may not even think exactly the same way, though there is a collective Indianness. So by being born in India, by living in India, a certain experience and a natural talent in adapting to new cultures, in assimilating those cultures, in living in those cultures, come to us. So this is when Indians go abroad, I believe that we take this talent with us, and then we apply it in the societies where we live in. And that's why Indians tend to be very successful in all parts of the world, wherever they go. There is, of course, whenever you go into a new environment, this could again apply within India to South Indians who come to a Mumbai or a Delhi or a Calcutta. There is a tendency to stick close to people from the same background, the same language, same culture. So that would also happen in Europe. But the important thing is to step beyond that, even if you start with that, to step beyond that and set yourself personal goals and say that I'm here to make as many friends as possible of people from this country or people from the international community who live here, to reach out to them, and also to reach out to the wide diversity of India, which is available in countries abroad. So we have this natural skill and talent. We must use it. We must take it abroad. There might be some ghettoization, which is a natural process. but we should always think and go beyond that ghettoization. And I know, I think wherever I go, when I see people from India who marry foreigners, who marry people from different cultures, I feel extremely happy that these are truly pioneers in global bridge building in a very, very personal sense.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm quite happy about your passion that you're showing right now. And when you said that you would love Europeans or people from other countries to develop that love for India and go study India, I felt, wait, hey, that's me. I first discovered India as a tourist, as a woman who wanted to just explore and go backpacking. And now I find myself moving towards academia on modern South Asian studies, and am hopefully planning to really embark on that journey and do research and contribute to academic literature on something that's come very close to me. At the same time, a lot of researchers I talk to emphasize that even though they love doing research on India, this is becoming more difficult. They try to apply for research visas, and it either takes a year or they don't get one at all. And that is quite frustrating to them. At the same time, we see a trend of tourist visas all of a sudden becoming quite easily accessible, being extended to, I think, 5 years or 10 years periods, so that tourism is really fueled. Do you see any trend of other visas also becoming easier to get in that sense?
Well, I think in recent times, actually, some of these visas, particularly visas for researchers, for journalists, have actually become regressive. And I personally believe that is most unfortunate. The government has been clamping down even on people of Indian origin, a group of people we call the OCIs, the overseas citizens of India, who are now foreign citizens, but who used to be Indian citizens before, or who have familial links to India. Even the government is clamping down and saying, no, you can't come and do research, you can't come and do journalism here. So I think that is wrong, and it is unhealthy. It is research. People like you, friends of India, people we should encourage to come to India as often as possible. We should encourage foreign journalists to come and write about India, to live in India, to understand India. We may not agree with everything that you say. There might be mistakes in what you write. There might be a different perspective which happens. But as a great democracy, we should learn to take this in stride, and we should understand that much of this is constructive criticism, and there is no society which is perfect in the world, and we have our share of problems and deficiencies and weakness. And by people looking at it from an outsider's perspective, by people studying it and exposing it to the glare of sunlight, many of these problems get addressed and progressively resolved. So I would always be in favor of an extremely warm and welcoming attitude towards all researchers, all journalists coming from abroad, not one based on fear or insecurity or worry as to what they come to India and do, what will they write, what will they say, and how will they criticize India. India should be big enough and broad-minded enough to be able to absorb all of this and continue to grow and flourish.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador, for this reply, and specifically on pointing out to the fact that as a democratic plural nation, our country should be broad-minded enough to absorb the observations of the people coming from outside. Coming back to one of the points that you made about the cultural diplomacy, I wanted to reflect a little bit on that aspect particularly, because in the last several years, specifically since a certain government has come into power, we have seen that there has been a rise in the cultural diplomacy across. And we have also seen that this cultural diplomacy is of a certain kind. So, and it doesn't always represent the plural values of India. So what should be the role of the diaspora, which still holds on to the plural value and the constitutional values, to to respond to this cultural diplomacy, or rather a parallel diplomacy, which we have seen emerging in the past several years?
Well, the government is only one actor, a minor player in India's larger cultural diplomacy or projection of soft power abroad. If you look at how people's impressions are formed about India, what are the main sources? What are the main channels? It is not like every person in whichever country of Europe that you live in, they don't go and look at what the government says to form their impressions about India. They read their newspapers, look at their television channels. They form impressions based on what they study in their schools, in their colleges, their textbooks, their knowledge of Mahatma Gandhi or India's freedom movement, about the role that India plays in the world or is capable of playing in the world as articulated by important academics within that society. They watch Indian movies, where Indian movies become popular and a big hit. They read novels written by Indian writers. They visit Indian restaurants. They attend programs and they listen to music by great Indian musicians, many of whom live abroad or those who live in India, who travel around the world. They watch dance performances. Like today, you have a Priyanka Chopra living in the US and working in Hollywood, and people get to know her. Ravi Shankar was a legend. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought yoga, meditation to the Western world, and by the Beatles having become his disciples, suddenly he was able to reach to an entire younger generation once upon a time, but which is now a very senior generation in most of the Western world. Again, you could go on with any number of examples. The ISKCON temples. I think it was Steve Jobs who said that at one point of time he was so poor and hungry, he would go to the local ISKCON temple for a $1 or a $2 meal, which was the cheapest meal that you could ever get anywhere in the city he was living in at that point of time, and which was very tasty and vegetarian food. Again, there is so much that we relate to India. So cultural diplomacy is something which is very large, which is very wide in its scope. And there are 1,000 inputs which come from different directions. The government is just one small component of that. Of course, the government has a certain amount of resources, and the current government has emphasized projecting India abroad in cultural terms in certain areas and certain aspects that they believe is important. But each one of you, as I said earlier, have the potential and have the opportunity to convey to the world around you your understanding of India, your belief in what is the essence of India, the idea of India as you see it, in multiple different ways. And each one of your voices is extremely important. The connections you have to academics, to media, to journalists, to other students, to, say, decision makers within your society, whether they be civil servants or political leaders, all of them are very important. And I think each one of you can play an important role. So while you may have differences with what is done in a particular way, rather than feel frustrated about it, I would challenge you and encourage you to present your alternate vision out there in the open. I think the summit is exactly a step in that direction. So continue to do this, and the larger message of India will get across. I think already in the world, there is sufficient knowledge of India, there is respect for India, there is affection for India, and there is knowledge about India. This may vary from different sections of society in which you live, or it may go up and down depending upon what are the current issues which are affecting each society. But there is no need to despair. You can the whole field is open for you, so to speak, in terms of projecting a right impression of India.
Yes, thanks a lot. And I know we have conversed about it earlier as well, that we should keep doing what we are doing also in terms of the People Summit on how this will, this kind of projects the plural ideas of India and perhaps create a more welcoming atmosphere also for the expertise and the knowledge that is there, as well as the concerns which are there in India. I want to take you to a difficult question. That question relates to the India's performance on the United Nations. Like, we have had concerns about India. As a diaspora also, we have had concerns about India. And there are certain areas where the international institutions have also expressed concerns about India. Not just, well, the European Union has expressed concerns lately, but I was also looking at the United Nations, that they have expressed concerns at several positions, especially when it comes to torture, and under the Convention of Torture, or the women's right, or even under the subcommittees, basically. And we have also noticed that India has not consistently responded to these queries or these concerns raised by the international institution. Can you maybe give us an idea that why is it so, that why is that India chooses not to respond at certain aspects, especially when it comes to universal basic human rights or rights against torture, or, you know, yeah, so can you please?
Well, Ritabra, I come to this question also with personal experience of having handled human rights and humanitarian matters in Geneva. I have dealt with many of these institutions and perhaps also played a role in the creation of many of these institutions. So let me say first and foremost that, you know, if you look at the world as a whole, there would be many countries who are in a similar situation. And to an extent, it is also because there is a proliferation of human rights instruments. There is a proliferation of agreements and declarations to which you have to submit reports. And sometimes the secretarial capacity back home in countries, especially in developing countries, are not strong enough and adequate enough to have dedicated people who are addressing these issues all the time. I know in India, in the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Home Affairs, when we used to have problems in being unable to cope up with the amount of responses we had to give, the amount of reports we had to submit, we finally went to the National School of Law and asked them to help us in drafting many of these reports, which are detailed, which are comprehensive, which require a lot of study and research even within India, because, you know, a bureaucrat sitting in Delhi or in Geneva doesn't have a clue as to what's happening across India in different parts of our country and on individual human rights violations or individual issues. So there is a practical issue. I highlight this just so that you are fully informed in your own criticism where something goes wrong. But beyond that, certainly there could also be malafide. There could be an intention not to respond, and there could be an intention to cover up certain ugly realities which we do not want exposed to the world or to the public. So this has to be combated, and the only way you can do is to constantly, by hammering in this point, that there are reports which have to be submitted, there are questions which have to be answered, which have not been answered. So you have to think in terms of how you can bring this to the notice of the people who matter within India, abroad, to the UN mechanisms. You'll have to think of how you can work in partnership with NGOs who are already working in India to bring the same message in front of the government and various other public entities, in front of the media, in front of parliament, or the judiciary, the National Human Rights Commission, So you need to have a multi-pronged approach, which on one hand recognizes that there might be some genuine limitations, there might be some bureaucratic delays. It may not all be out of bad intention or bad purpose, but yet where genuinely it looks like there is a deliberate reason to delay or a deliberate effort to obfuscate and not give answers, how you can constantly bring it to the attention of all the people who matter within India, so that these responses do come, and where if that doesn't work, then you can see within the UN itself what is the recourse that is available. You can also see how putting some international limelight on some of these issues will perhaps persuade India or any other country which is in a similar situation to perform much better on the yardsticks which have been collectively agreed in all the human rights forums.
Thanks a lot for that reply. I see Snehal and then Anupant. So Anupant, I know you raised your hands first, but I would like to give it to Snehal because that's her first question. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ritumra. Hello, Ambassador Rajamony. So when you were in the Netherlands, you were personally involved in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case at the ICJ. So I would like to ask you about what role did India's international relations play in the verdict? And I would also kind of like to relate this question to what Ritumra just said, highlighted about the human rights problem, the human rights situation that we are facing in India and the international attention that we are getting right now. So so if at all international relations played a role in the Kulbhushan Jadhav verdict, how do you see the future for us would be considering considering the points that you highlighted, like there might be a deliberate attempt at hiding some things, and that does in fact impact our international relations. So if at all in the future we come across similar issues, so how do you think all these aspects would fare in our relations with other countries, in the UN, in the ICJ and forums like that?
So basically how the optics affects the elections in the ground.
Sorry, how the optics affect
how the optics of, or rather how the India's position as an international player affects the response that India gets on the ground level when there are reports or concerns of violation within India. So I think that's what you wanted.
Well, I think here once again, I go back to what I said a little earlier, that first you must understand and you must study well, and you must be aware of the larger picture, even as you focus on specific issues. First understand the International Court of Justice. What is the International Court of Justice? It is primarily the judicial arm of the United Nations. It is a court to which only countries can go. It is not like the International Criminal Court, where individuals or NGOs could also submit petitions and submit complaints against individuals or countries. In the International Court of Justice, only a country can bring up a problem vis-a-vis another country. The litigants are two countries alone. So in the Jadhav case, India brought a case to the International Court of Justice saying that the rights of an Indian citizen, Kulbhushan Jadhav, which he is entitled to under the Vienna Convention, is being denied by Pakistan. And Pakistan has violated the Vienna Convention by denying these rights. So there is no question of India's international relations coming into that case or the judgment, other than our own relations with Pakistan. This is a legal matter which we bring before the highest court in the world, and where the court, which comprises of judges drawn from all parts of the world, look at the legality of the arguments that we make. What is the basis, the Vienna Convention, on the basis of which we make those arguments. They listen to Pakistan, and between these two countries, they adjudicate and they take a decision. So here, the human rights element is essentially drawn from the principles within the Vienna Convention itself. One of the most important of those principles is that if any national of a country is arrested by another country, the embassy or the consulate or the high commission of that country will have access to him, and he will have right to a fair trial, and he will have recourse to judicial assistance, all of which was denied by Pakistan in the case of Kulbhushan. Pakistan went on to not only deny him, but to put him in front of a military tribunal and to sentence him to death without giving him the basic rights which both Pakistan and India have agreed as adherents of the Vienna Convention. So this case, in a way, when the judges look at the case and when India made arguments in front of the International Court of Justice, we often highlighted the fact that a military tribunal is not a due process of law. We highlighted the fact that the military runs Pakistan effectively in many ways, that there are military rulers who have been deciding on what should be done and what should not be done within Pakistan. So in some ways, India's democracy was juxtaposed against Pakistan's political system, which is dominated by the military, in order to persuade the judges to have a more lenient and a more favorable view of India's arguments in that particular case. So all this, once again, I think is very different from what you're trying to say or what you're thinking of vis-a-vis the human rights situation in India. The human rights situation in India stands on its own. Human rights across the country, once again, there are no countries, I would say, which where you don't see human rights violations, whether it be Europe, whether it be the United States. We all know, I think just recently the US was rocked by Black Lives Matters. There's been a Me Too movement which has went all over the world. In Europe, there are instances of racial discrimination. There are instances of violations against minorities. So if you try and see only India as a country which has problems or where things are going wrong, then it is easy to dub whoever is saying that as a Western agent or somebody speaking purely from a Western perspective. In fact, this is the argument of China. China criticizes Amnesty, China criticizes Human Rights Watch, and China brings out an annual report of its own in which it lists human rights violations in all Western countries in the world. So I think if you are concerned about the human rights situation in India, and if you would like that to be addressed, if you would like that to be improved, then you have to keep in mind the fact that you have to come across as truly people who stand for human rights in all parts of the world, people who believe that there should be no violation anywhere, and that there are certain basic principles which have been agreed upon by all countries of the world. And India, while India has many failings, India still is a democracy with a lot of checks and balances. The current government has come in power through an electoral process, through winning the majority of votes in elections, and that is the way all democratic governments are constituted. And within India, we have a judiciary, we have human rights commissions, we have a free press, we have an opposition, we have civil society. So you must see how they work, how they are highlighting these issues, how you can strengthen their hands, how you can work in partnership and collaboration with them so that you can collectively bring these issues to the limelight in the interest of a better resolution, not just to embarrass or to finger point or to criticize someone, but to truly ensure that the situation improves and where there are wrongs being committed, they change. So I think this is very important. It is not easy. It is a slow process, and it takes time, and it requires patience, and it requires persistence. But ultimately, no country from the outside can force India to change. Even if the International Court of Justice, in fact, you would find that there are decisions of the International Court of Justice which countries reject. Because the International Court of Justice does not have an army, does not have a police force which can go and enforce its decisions. The viability of the International Court of Justice and the implementation of its decisions is based on the fact that countries voluntarily agree to come before the International Court of Justice. They accept the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. So in the domestic sphere, if India has to change, that change has to come from within India. And how can that change come from within India? How can you accelerate that process of change within India? How can you utilize the multiple mechanisms which have been created within India, whether it is a National Commission on Rights of Women, a National Commission on Rights of Children, a National Commission for the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes, for minorities. All this you need to see, and you need to try and get them to work. So sometimes these institutions don't work. I know when I was handling human rights, I was shocked, just as we were talking about reports to UN organizations, there are reports to the Indian Parliament, which many of these institutions have to submit, and they don't submit. They are delayed by several years. And even when they submit, nobody reads them, nobody discusses them. There's no debate on that. And it's just tabled on the floor of the Parliament, and then it is forgotten because the Parliament is lost in other issues and other what the MPs perceive as biggest problems. So there needs to be consistent efforts to identify the main issues, the important issues, to understand and work on those issues, to collaborate with people within India who are also engaged in these issues, and then to arrive at collective solutions on how we can move forward.
Thanks a lot for that response, Ambassador. In fact, we have been doing some of this that you have highlighted, especially collaborating with the grassroots NGOs within India and trying to build solidarity there to bring upon change, and also taking up the responsibility going forward that we will be engaged in also the UPR process of India, which is coming up in next 2 years, I think, one and a half years or so. So this is something which is in the process. Now, I would like to hand over to Anu, who had his hand up for some time, and then Indu after that. Or if Anu allows Indu to go first, that's on him.
I think this time I will go. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to bring back to the comment that you made, that you really appreciate and like when you see mixed couples, between Indian nationals and Europeans or otherwise. And I think that this is something very important, an acknowledgement, which doesn't come so easily from Indians, in general. For example, I'm based here in France, and I see a lot of mixed couples, French with Africans, French with Vietnamese, French with Sri Lankans. Thanks to the Erasmus program that exists now in Europe, the number goes like there are 1 million or 2 billion new couples, mixed couples. And I compare this with the fact that in India, it is looked in a very different way. For example, anecdotally, I will tell you an example of a mixed couple. The boy is from India, the girl is from Europe. And the first reaction that many people give is that this is a victory for India, So which is very surprising because it's a victory for two countries, two people, irrespective of gender. But then again, I will bring to the attention that in India, as we know, most of the marriages are in the same caste, same religion, arranged marriages, this context. And you come from a very distinct and important place like Kerala, where you have this beautiful confluence of religions, 3 religions, Hindu, Christian, and Muslims. And I think a lot of people from Europe, when they go to India, they are surprised, happy to see masjids and mosques and temples and churches together. And we know that people relatively stay peacefully, although riots keep happening in between. And after 2014, things really changed. But I think this is very important to recognize that we do not cross those lines. We do not really go and marry so easily or share food, Second point, and I will stop. It's about the secularism that we have in India, which is mostly inclusive, where you can manifest your religious symbols and practices, compared to the one that we have in France, which is called laïcité, which is exclusive, where you are not supposed to show in public places your religious identity, be politically correct, socially correct. Thank you.
I think you raised two important issues, and issues for which there are no easy answers. Yes, we people from India come from sometimes very conservative backgrounds, very socially repressed backgrounds, and even today within India, even in a place like Kerala, which is considered more progressive than other places, you don't have the freedoms, or you see a rollback of that progressive spirit that once used to exist. And these are part of global trends. We all know that globally there is a sense of alienation, there is a xenophobia, anti-foreigner sentiment, there is a fear of the Muslims, Islamophobia, there are attacks on minorities. Being different is no longer as encouraged as belonging to one dominant group or community or society. We saw it in Brexit, we saw it in Trumpism, we see it in the extreme right in Europe, across Europe, and we see it in many parts of India. So we come from within India, as you pointed out, still society is predominantly not just conservative, but in some ways very reluctant to change, very reluctant to bridge, to create new paradigms and to encourage young people to be free and open-minded and to live the principles that we actually espouse. And we write down in a constitution. Of course, you can also say that India is not alone in all that. If you take the United States, for example, when did the blacks finally get equal rights? It was only in the 60s, after a tremendous fight led by Dr. Martin Luther King and other African-American leaders. So similarly in India too, India is even more slow and impervious to change, and a lot of effort needs to take place within our country. I can just give you the example. Recently, some of you might have seen on YouTube and on social media, there was a young two medical students, a Hindu boy and a Muslim girl, who did a dance together. Initially everybody said, oh, wonderful. But when they discovered that it was actually a Muslim and a Hindu, suddenly some people started saying, love jihad, and attacking them. Of course, there was a counter push by more and more young people coming out and dancing and saying people of different religions, different genders can come together and do these things. So even in Kerala, there are problems. The trends which we see worldwide in terms of a setback to the liberal order, a setback to open-mindedness, a setback to inclusiveness, affects all parts of the world and needs to be fought against severely. So that applies to Europe too. And then on it, I think we bring with ourselves certain colonial sensibilities of anything that you do vis-a-vis a dominant Western country as being some kind of a colonial achievement of having scored something or having made something, rather than seeing it as a relationship of equals where we both gain and we both benefit. So that is the social aspect to the problem that you raised. And the second issue that you raised was
secularism and laicity.
Yes. So here again, in terms of secularism, there are different models of secularism, and the French model has been one, I think, where it directly draws from the French Revolution, where the state is strictly secular and doesn't want any manifestation of religion in any form of state practice, while India has been the other extreme, where we have defined our secularism as equal respect for all religions and equal support and patronage of all religions. In India, there has been criticism that this has gone to too ridiculous an extent, with too many holidays for every single religious festival possible, with leaders overtly using religious symbols in their political activities, with public support for whether it be a Hajj or a Hindu religious pilgrimage to Vaishno Devi. And of course, religion has been used during elections by politicians, by political parties, to divide people and to try and polarize people and corner the votes of one set of people at least. For a country like India, it means because we are inherently, or religion plays a very major part in the lives of people. You would recall that even in the national movement, Mahatma Gandhi's attempt or his technique was to have readings of the Bible and the Quran and the Gita before every meeting, so that he brings all people of all these communities together under the banner of the national movement. So right from the beginning, we have used these techniques, and religion plays a big role in the minds of people, in their lives, in society as a whole. So to go to the French model would be too extreme a step. We may not be able to achieve it. So in many ways, the kind of path we have chosen is the better path. But at the same time, the other extreme of the government overtly trying to pander to every religion, political parties and political leaders pandering to every religion, every election suddenly witnessing a procession of people from different political parties visiting temples, mosques, and churches to try and draw the votes of that religious community. I think that is wrong, and we need to correct it, but we can only correct it through public debate, public discussion of these issues within India.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. In fact, if any of you have read about Ambassador Rajamony online, then you would realize that he himself went against the social norm to marry his wife when he was a younger person. And I would also like to tell you that almost everyone in this panel today is actually in a cross-country relationship, which again speaks to what you have been talking about between the Europe and Indian relation, how we can develop it further. So we have tried our best. So with this,
but absolutely, but you would recall that only recently I wrote a Facebook post also bemoaning the fact that even in Kerala, suddenly you don't find the progressive spirit of the kind which probably existed in my Yama days, and expressing the need for that. And it is not just we are speaking in the European context, but I have traveled all around Southeast Asia, in Singapore, in Malaysia. It is such a joy and pleasure to see children of Indians married to Chinese or Malays married to Chinese. These civilizations, these societies and cultures we think which are so different from each other. In fact, I know personally in Delhi and in China that Indians were married to Chinese, and despite political relations being bad, these marriages survive. And India-Pakistan marriages are amongst the most difficult for anyone. And I mean, good for them. I am all for them, and I would like to support them in every way possible. But both governments, the Pakistan government and the Indian government, try and make the lives of anybody who marries across the border as difficult and as miserable as possible in terms of family visits and coming and going. So it is a challenge in many ways, but I'm glad it's happening, and I hope it'll continue to happen.
Yeah, we all share your feeling of love azad instead of love jihad here, to be honest. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Indu, because she has a question, and we have a little bit of time left. Maybe we'll be 5 minutes over time, but Indu,
yeah, I hope there is still time. So I wanted to ask about the personal experience of you as an ambassador or working with the embassy, because effectively embassies and diplomats are the extended arm of the government. You in the case of government of India. You said earlier like how every country has their own problems, human rights issues. Have you experienced, or like I'm pretty sure that the diplomats have at some times they might have had a conflict, a personal conflict when there is a human rights issue back in their own country. But then do they still have to be very pro-government? And how far should a diplomat be pro-government? To put this into a context, like recently, Myanmar had the coup, and the Myanmarese ambassador in UK was sacked because he criticized the military coup. So is there a challenge, a big challenge with all diplomats with this issue?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is a big challenge, and there is a big challenge with all diplomats. The Myanmar cases that you mentioned are the most glaring examples. There is also, if you remember, the Ukraine incident during President Trump's administration. There were over 1,000 State Department officials who wrote a petition saying that the stance of President Trump was wrong. So in India too, unfortunately, we don't have too many such high-profile incidents. Say when there was an emergency in India, I don't know of any Indian diplomat who objected to that. But just right now, there is a big debate in India as to whether like all the embassies are being asked by the government to counter the news coming out of India that the situation in Delhi is very bad. There is no oxygen, there is no beds. There was an incident of, I think, the acting High Commissioner in Australia writing to the Australian newspaper, objecting to one of the news reports which had come in the paper. Yeah. So there is a debate in the social media amongst, in the public space as to what should be the role of the diplomat, and should he be telling the truth of what's happening in India, or should he be trying to whitewash the role of the government and trying to present a positive image when every report out of Delhi indicates the opposite. So it is a dilemma. The Myanmar cases are extreme, where people feel so strongly that they go against the government. They feel the government has done something wrong, the military has done something wrong, and they are willing to risk the consequences, because the consequences you cannot, if you are an employee of the government, you are sent abroad as a diplomat to represent the country, yes, but then effectively it is the government who gives you your instructions. So if you go against the government, you must be willing to quit or be sacked. And not everybody is in a position or is willing to do that. And often people choose the path of silence or quiet acquiescence. But there are people who object. There are people who say this is not right. There are people who say, at least within internal forums, who advise against trying to present a wrong image simply because it doesn't work. I will say from my personal case, a coup, a complete change of government is something very radical, or even the situation in India today is quite extreme. But from my experience of my time in Geneva handling human rights issues, many of the human rights problems we were referring to, there the approach I took as a student of law, as someone coming from a family of lawyers, somebody familiar with public interest litigation in India, with the judgments of the Supreme Court, was to say that any response I give to a UN mechanism will not just be informed by either the letter of the law or the position of the government, but also the collective wisdom as has emerged from the Supreme Court and what is deemed to be the spirit of the Constitution. So I would tell the UN mechanisms, for example, on an issue like death penalty, if somebody asks, is India in support of death penalty? Is India in favor of death penalty? And I should tell you, in terms of context, the whole world is divided. There are a small group of countries who are firmly in favor of death penalty, and a large number of countries who firmly believe death penalty should be abolished. The countries who believe death penalty should be abolished include most of Europe, Latin America, even Africa. The countries who firmly believe in death penalty are an interesting mix of the United States, of Saudi Arabia, of Singapore, of Turkey, and many other countries like that. So where does India fit in the death penalty debate internationally? If we go by the letter of the law, death penalty is in our law. So we have death penalty. Death penalty has been executed. It has been used over the years. So that means we are in the camp of those who believe death penalty should be there in criminal law. While if you look at the judgments of the Supreme Court, you find that the Supreme Court has said that while death penalty is there in the law, it should be awarded only in the rarest of rare cases. So in that sense, we are not like Saudi Arabia, or we are not even like US and some states of the US or Singapore, which firmly believes in harsh deterrent punishment. We are more in terms of give scope for mistakes, give scope for error. Don't send a man to the gallows unless you are 100% sure, and truly it is the rarest of the rare cases where the offense committed is so egregious and where there is no hope that this individual can ever be rescued. So you can inform that. Similarly, when cases of individual human rights violations are brought to your notice, as a government official, you can just reject it and say, no, this has not happened. Or you can say, no, there is no basis in these allegations. Or you can go back, you can go to the Ministry of Home Affairs. Through the Ministry of Home Affairs, you can go to the state concerned, the place concerned, the person concerned, and you can constantly, like you as NGOs do, from within the government also, you can constantly harass them by writing letters, by asking questions, by asking for more information, and by putting pressure on them, whereby whoever at the grassroots level is responsible for something wrong, he is forced to correct it due to all the pressure that is coming to him from the embassy abroad, from the central government in Delhi, or from the state government. So I have tried to take a reformist approach to addressing some of these problems, to present not just a governmental viewpoint, but a collective Indian state view or a country view. But it is not easy. It is often not easy. And when you have very clear directions saying, do this or don't do this, at the most you can ignore it, but it is very difficult to go against it. If under today's circumstances, I was in a station abroad and told, go tell everybody that everything in India is hunky-dory, the government is managing the situation perfectly well, I would remain silent and I would refuse to go out and publicize that fact, because I know truth is different. But if I have to go out and tell everybody, no, truth is different, what this government is saying is wrong, as an ambassador, as a diplomat, then I'm not doing the right thing. I should be willing to quit, or I should be willing to be sacked and face the consequences of going against what the government is instructing me to do.
Thank you for the answer. I think it's a very, I feel like you have given like very valuable insights, and I take this also as an advice or a word for the future diplomats to take a reformist view and to have the truth always.
There is scope for change within the system, and we must constantly try for that also. And for people like you who are outside, academics, NGOs, people who look at the system very critically, you have friends within the system also. Don't paint everybody with one brush and say that everybody is an agent of the government. You have many friends within the system whom you should be able to. There are people who may not be willing to stray away from the governmental line, but you will also find lots of people who are within the system but still friends and who believe there is a right and there is a wrong. I know when I think the Jamia Millia and JNU issues and all had happened in India, there were a large number of students who had come to protest in front of the Indian embassy. So many of my younger colleagues were very scared but they actually sympathized with the students, and because it was raining, it was cold, they were very tempted to offer them tea and biscuits and to look after them in a way, because they too have come from the same universities. They are also young, they have just come out of these universities. But then, of course, they were also scared that somebody would report them to the government and they would land in bigger trouble. So each person wrestles with these individual dilemmas and comes to an answer for himself.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Rajamony. And yes, I do remember those protests outside the embassy in Netherlands as well. And also given the fact that you yourself are from JNU, actually. So we can understand that it might be a very conflicting position at times. With this, I would like to end this because we start with our next panel pretty soon. And we are very grateful for you to join us for this conversation, and we will stay in touch with you on how to grow this conversation further, how to grow this people-to-people diplomacy further, and also because we are very much determined to put our own EU-India People's Roadmap and set an agenda on what the diplomacy should look like for these very massively plural democracies.
Wonderful. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you virtually, interacting with you and having this discussion. I'm happy to extend whatever support I can to all your efforts to bridge India and the EU at a people's level. And please do say hello to my good friend Endram, whom I believe is your next panelist.
Yes, yes. All right. Thanks a lot once again. And with this, we can end this session. Thanks, Alina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.